Verification, I think, is a feature that's pretty unique to London. It does involve taking each key statement in the document, whether a fact or whether of opinion, and asking the directors to provide the source of that statement, or if it's a statement of opinion, to explain why they think it's a reasonable statement to make. Now, it's really there, and I have to say it's not the most fun part of the IPO process, but it is there to provide protection for the directors, because shouldn't an investor come along down the line and say, well, actually, that statement wasn't correct. It is a defence that you can show that you took reasonable steps to make sure that the information was actually correct. So, it's an important and quite time-consuming part of the process. Lawyers also tend to draft quite a large part of the admission document. Different banks have got different views on that. But I think one thing I would say is that when you're negotiating your fee quotes for your lawyers and for your banks, you should try and establish what the relevant roles are going to be, because it can be quite an important feature of the cost if the lawyers are going to be drafting the document. Leaving aside the admission document, we have a very key role, I think, in negotiating the underwriting or the placing agreement on behalf of the issuer. So this is the document by which the bank agrees to go out and find buyers for the company's shares, and also takes the various protections that it needs. So it will include typically indemnification provisions, warranties by the company, also perhaps by the selling shareholders, or an IPO also by the directors. And I suppose our role there really is to make sure that what's being asked for is reasonable and in line with market practice. In order to cover off the market, to protect the aftermarket, it's customary for directors and major shareholders to undertake not to sell their shares in the company for at least a year following admission. In fact, that's a requirement of the AIM rules, where there has been no independent trading record for the AIM company for a year prior to the IPO. Again, there are sort of market norms as to what level of restriction should be given and what the carve-out should be for the benefit of the principal shareholders. So you need someone who knows what the market practice is, who can advise on what's appropriate there. There are, of course, a host of ancillary documents to be prepared by the English lawyers, the Indian lawyers, the Channel Island lawyers. You'll get opinion letters from the Channel Island lawyers and from the Mauritian lawyers confirming that those companies are duly incorporated and in good standing. There are memoranda on the responsibilities of the directors. Now again, the nominated advisor has to report to the exchange that the directors are aware of their responsibilities, and one way that they take comfort on this is that they have evidence that a memorandum has been produced and has been explained to the directors on their responsibilities. So there's a host of other documents, so we tend to find ourselves fairly busy during the IPO process, not just on the admission document, but also on the other documents that go to support it. Well, here's an indicative timetable. This one works for 3 months. I think it is fair to say that with a good team of advisors and a well-organised process, you can get onto AIM in 3 months, but that does assume that you've taken all the steps to get into shape, including the ones that I referred to a bit earlier about structuring, getting the tax arrangements in place, doing that pre-audit process. But if you are in good shape and you've got that structure in place, you can get there in 3 months. Probably 3 to 6 months is a fairer assessment. Initially, the process is focused on really getting the pathfinder, or as some call it, the red herring, ready, so that marketing can commence. We shouldn't forget that this whole process that we lawyers get immersed in is really worth nothing unless the marketing itself is a success. So you've got to spend that time getting the pathfinder ready. It needs to be a substantially complete version. It's got to be verified. The diligence needs to be largely complete, so the bank knows when they go out there's nothing embarrassing that could come out of the woodwork halfway through marketing. So a lot of the work gets done in the run-up to releasing the pathfinder. There's then typically 2 or 3 weeks of marketing. Let's assume that you bring the money home. The first then that that the market will often hear about an IPO is what's called a 10-day announcement. So 10 days prior to the anticipated date of IPO, an announcement goes out containing prescribed information about the company and about the fundraise. I think that is a feature of AIM that distinguishes it from some other markets where publicity typically is earlier in the process. And I can tell you there are US potential investors involved, then we are twice as neurotic about publicity as we would be if there was no US involvement. And Jamie might explain a bit why that is when he talks about going to the US. I'll say a little bit about corporate governance. Good corporate governance is a real asset in the City of London, and I think following the crash of 2008, 2009, it's assumed even more importance. I mean, every week there is a piece of paper going out encouraging institutional investors to play a greater role in monitoring their investments, various guidelines being prepared on an almost weekly or certainly monthly basis. Main market companies are subject to what's called the UK Corporate Governance Code. So the listing rules for main market companies require them to report on how they've applied the code. If they haven't applied it, then why they haven't applied it. So it's what's called a comply or explain regime. That recognises, I suppose, the fact that different companies have got different needs, but fundamentally there are principles that need to be applied. AIM companies are not subject to the UK Corporate Governance Code, at least not officially, but they are encouraged by investors and also by investment banks alike to apply the principles in a manner which is appropriate to their size and investor profile. There's an organisation called the Quoted